all of our expected guests to arrive. Hello again and welcome. If you've just joined in the last 30 seconds or so, we're here to talk about updating the rules for the renewable fuel standard. And we are going to wait 1 more minute and then we will get started. Okay, while we're waiting this last 30 seconds to see if we have a few more folks arrive, I wanted to ask you all if you could please make sure that your Zoom name includes your full name and your organization. That will be very helpful to us. You're welcome to also include your pronouns. Okay, I think we are ready to get going. I just want to double check with city staff. Can you give me the thumbs up? You okay to get started? Awesome. Okay, welcome. Thank you all for being here. I would like to start by letting everybody know that we are recording this meeting. You should have gotten the pop-up when you joined. This meeting, the recording will be available on the RFS program website in the coming days. So today we are here for city staff to provide you all a first overview of the approach they are developing for the new RFS rules. And we are here to give you an opportunity to ask questions. And I'll explain in just a moment a bit more about how you can provide your early feedback on what you hear today using an online form. So the rules themselves for the RFS are in progress. Once they are completed, they will be available for public comment, but that is not today. Today, city staff want to get your early input on the work they are doing. The questions you ask today and the feedback you provide through that online form will help staff shape the draft rules. So let me start by introducing those key staff who are here today. Kyle Diesner is the climate policy analyst who is leading the rule-making process. Kyle, you want to give a wave? There he is. Pam Neild is the city staff member leading the Technical Advisory Committee, or TAC. And thank you, Pam. Andrea Jacob, the climate program manager who oversees this work. Thank you, Andrea. And Megan Reed, BPS's public information manager. So our agenda for today starts with a presentation of this approach that the city is developing for the RFS rules, and then we will open the floor to all of your questions. Before I turn it over to Kyle for that presentation, a couple of housekeeping details. So I mentioned earlier that the city would like your feedback on what you hear today using an online form. I am putting that into the chat right now. There is a link there. This form will be open until next Monday, the 19th at 5 p.m. So please be sure to provide your input by Monday at 5 p.m. Today, we are excited to hear your questions. You are welcome to voice those after the presentation. I'll give you some more details about that. You're also welcome to use the chat. The one thing we ask today is that you not use the chat to private message city staff. If you have something you want to put in the chat, please send it to everyone. Okay, that's all for the introduction and the housekeeping details. I would like to now turn the floor over to Kyle Diesner for an introduction to what the city is working on.
Thank you, Marty. Andrea, minor technical difficulty. It says screen sharing disabled.
All right, I'm going to make you a co-host. My apologies.
Thank you.
There you go.
Perfect. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a sneak peek at where we're headed with our draft admin rules. As Marty mentioned, this will be an opportunity.
Kyle, I'm so
Yes.
sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We're seeing your like the back end of your presenter view. I think if you go to the display settings and change the display that you're sharing, then we'll see it like in the perfect. Thank you.
That did it?
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Thanks for catching that, Marty. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a sneak peek at where we're headed with our administrative rules. There's two reasons really why we're updating the rules. The first is that City Council adopted new standards, so new blending requirements and new CI standards. And we also expanded the rules to include renewable diesel, not just biodiesel. The second reason is really the current rules were adopted in 2007, well before state and federal policies went into effect. And so they contain a lot of duplication of policies that are already covered by the state or federal government. So we see an opportunity to scale back some of that content. In addition, the city's rules can be trued up with state practices for better consistency for regulated entities. And as a refresher, I'm going to start off with a quick overview of those code changes. First, the new blending requirements. Today, the RFS specifies that diesel fuel must contain 5% biodiesel. Starting next year, the policy will phase in increasing volumes of renewable fuel starting in 2024 all the way through 2030 when it gets to 99% renewable. And to note here, this can be met with either biodiesel or renewable diesel. So the policy is fuel neutral and doesn't specify which product is used. Blending requirements are pretty well understood by the market and are fairly straightforward. Our goal is to really mirror both the current RFS enforcement practices and the state enforcement practices, hopefully making that as easy as possible for compliance on the blending requirement. This will include random retail inspections of the blends for sale in the city, which may include review of product transfer documents, which should show the percent of renewable fuel purchased, and sampling of fuel for laboratory testing, just like we have been doing over the last decade. There are no reporting requirements associated with enforcing the blending requirement. While blending requirements are straightforward, compliance with the CI standard is much more complex. And partially this is because this has never been done before. The city will rely on the state's Clean Fuels program to tell us what the CI value of a fuel is. And we will use the Clean Fuel program fuel pathway codes and product transfer documents to verify. Currently, CFP data shows that statewide biodiesel and renewable diesel on average are already very close to the adopted standards in Portland. And that's 40 grams of CO2e per megajoule. In our research over the last few months, we've dug into what will be required to enforce a CI standard based on the logistics of fuel supply chains, how their renewable fuels make their way from production, represented by this barrel, to a terminal, probably in Portland, to a truck, and to retail, like a gas station, or this could be in the case of a wholesale purchase consumer like the city of Portland, our city fleet filling facility. And if the real world looked anything like this diagram, then tracking and enforcing the new CI standard would be straightforward. Reality, however, is much more complex. A single tank of fuel at a terminal can have fuel in it from multiple sources. meaning multiple different fuel pathways and multiple different CIs. Determining some of that CI will meet the 40 CI limit, and some of that product will not. Determining the fuel content of a tank of biodiesel at the terminal in Portland may require averaging the CI values of different fuels that went into it. And the carbon intensity of the fuel in that tank will likely change on a daily, possibly even an hourly basis, as some fuel is lifted and new fuel is added. And that truck that lifts the fuel off the rack, it may be going to a single destination, but more likely it's going to several, some of which may be in Portland and subject to the RFS CI standard, and others which may be outside the city. The RFS rules for defining the CI value of a fuel and the approach to reporting and enforcing the policy need to acknowledge these real market complexities. There are two ways that we can go about defining the carbon intensity of a fuel. First, an absolute CI value. In this approach, the only fuel that would meet the RFS requirements would need to have an approved fuel pathway with a CI value of 40 or less. To use this, this approach is simple, but it lacks flexibility to adapt to the changing market conditions like shortages or price spikes, nor the real world complexity of fuel supply chains. To use the absolute CI definition, fuel with different CIs would need to be stored separately, and this would require more on-site storage capacity. The second approach is a weighted average. The CI of a tank of fuel that includes a blend of two different fuel pathways could be averaged based on their proportions to create an average CI value. This approach is flexible, but it's more complicated. It requires calculating a weighted average of the blended fuel. We are recommending that both options be available to fuel suppliers to acknowledge the complexity of the market and to reduce the need for additional storage capacity. And thus, we're proposing two compliance pathways. One is going to be more applicable to the situations that we hear are pretty rare, but we know they're out there. And that's when the fuel supply chain is simple enough that the fuel from a single fuel pathway can be tracked from its entry into the state all the way to retail. This compliance approach will require that the fuel pathway code is included on all product transfer documents from terminal to retail. Fuel pathway codes confirm the state-approved life cycle carbon intensity value and are required for all fuels imported to Oregon. This approach will be enforced through inspection of product transfer documents at retail, and there's no additional reporting required because those product transfer documents will show that fuel pathway. Now, for those more complex situations, and as we understand it, more common scenarios, we're proposing a book and claim approach to CI values. This approach decouples the environmental attributes from the physical product, allowing the environmental attributes to be transferred separately from the product itself. Perhaps most well-known use of book and claim is the form of renewable energy credits, which are used by utility green power programs. Book and claim would require fuel importers to report to the city on the total volume of fuel imported to the state, the volume of fuel sold in Portland, and to show that they imported as much fuel at 40 CI or less as was distributed in the Portland market. Some importers may not know where their fuel will be sold at retail. And in these cases, we will allow the use of a deemed value on a per capita basis to estimate how much fuel is sold in the city. The advantage of this approach is that it relieves the rest of the supply chain from reporting. Compliance is handled by fuel importers. So this approach would be enforced through regular, quarterly, and annual reporting to the city by fuel importers and verified by tracking product transfer documents from retail back to the fuel importer. I wanted to add a little more detail around the reporting requirements for book and claim, since this is a little more complex. So fuel importers would be required to report 3 data points to the city of Portland. First, the importer's total volume of diesel fuel imported into Oregon over the quarter, the percent of diesel fuel sold in Portland or use a deemed value, and 3, the minimum percent renewable fuel required by the RFS. This would give the required volume of fuel at CI 40 or less that fuel importers would need to show documentation that they were imported. So as an example, if a fuel importer brought 100,000 gallons of fuel into Oregon, 20% of which was sold in Portland in this period, and the RFS required 15% renewable fuel that meets the standard, this importer would be required to show documentation that it imported at least 3,000 gallons of renewable fuel that meets the 40 CI standard or less. With the exception of the volume of fuel sold in Portland, this should largely mirror what fuel importers are already required to report to the State Clean Fuels Program. We hope this alignment will help simplify compliance. So I've been focused mostly on new rules for the carbon intensity standard and how CI value can be defined and enforced. But before we open up for questions on that, I do want to kind of zoom out a bit and let you know about the other changes we're making for the RFS rules. Folks can find the current version of the administrative rules online. And I will enter the link for that in the chat as soon as I'm stopped sharing my screen. The sections on the left of this table here correspond with the sections in the current rules. We're recommending minor revisions to align with code updates for the section where the action in the middle says revise. For example, we'll be updating the authority that council changed in December. We'll be adding some new definitions. And in the case of enforcement, we'll be adding the new penalties that were adopted by City Council in December. So these are all pretty minor revisions that are informed directly from code updates. The sections that are listed here as delete under the action are ones that we're recommending that we remove from our local code, from our local rules, because they're already covered by either state rules or the federal government. And really that leaves the CI standard compliance as the key new area and why we decided to focus this conversation really on that piece. I think the rest of the changes should be pretty self-evident just based on the code updates. So briefly to talk about timeline, as Marty said, we'll have a survey form that's open through June 19th. So you'll have a few days to provide some feedback on what we're presenting here today. And in late June, so in a couple weeks, we'll be releasing a draft for public comment. This will be your chance to actually see the rule text and weigh in on those details. We thought that would be hard to cover in a public meeting like this. So you'll have a full month to sit down with those rules, evaluate them, and submit formal comments to the city. Our goal is to adopt final rules in late July or early August. This will give the market several months to get things in position before the May 2024 blending requirement goes into effect. As a closing note, this is just the start of the process, one step on a long journey to decarbonize transportation by 2050. This is also only the first cut at our rulemaking. These rules will not be effective until May 2024, and the major blend requirements don't phase in until 2026. So we have time to further refine our approach in the coming years, and we look forward to working with our technical advisory committee when they're seated later this year. And with that, I'm gonna hand things back to Marty to open up Q&A. My email is listed on this slide here, and folks are welcome to contact me directly.
Thank you, Kyle. Okay, so we have 40 minutes for your questions. And before we open it up, I just want to remind everyone that what we are looking for from you today in this meeting are your questions. And we'd like to have your input, your thoughts on what you're hearing today via the online form. The link is in the chat. If you joined the meeting too late and you don't see the link, I will place it again in the chat in a moment. Okay, so how will this work? There are a lot of us here today, which is fantastic. I would greatly appreciate it if you would use the reaction button in your bottom menu bar to raise your hand if you would like to speak. The other option is you are welcome to put your questions in the chat, and we will be monitoring that. The responses you receive may be within the chat, or it may be that Andrea Jacob with the Bureau will raise her hand and voice your question. And I wanted to let you know that it's really important to us that everyone who wants to get a chance to ask a question has an opportunity to do so. So please know that if you've already spoken and you raise your hand again, I may wait a little bit to come back to you until we make sure that everyone who wants to speak does have the opportunity to do so. So with that, I will take a look and see if anybody raises their hand. Excellent. Mark Ventura with Phillips 66. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hello, Mark Ventura with Phillips 66. Thanks for the presentation and opportunity for Q&As. I've got a question on the lab testing that was brought up on one of the slides. The question is, today apparently you're doing enforcement with lab testing, and because the requirement today is biodiesel is differentiating from petroleum diesel, hydrocarbons, so it's fairly, quote, easy to recognize and measure the volume of the content of the biodiesel. In the future, starting next year, when you allow renewable diesel, the combination of renewable diesel and biodiesel to meet that percentage, a traditional test method won't be able to differentiate between renewable diesel and petroleum diesel. It's a hydrocarbon. So what kind of methodology are you thinking of doing to prove out the renewable content, if that's what you're trying to do? And obviously the CI, you can't test for it, as you know. So I was curious about how you intend to test for that renewable content.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and you are right, we won't be testing for CI. That will be a process of following the documents. But for the blend requirement, we are able to test for the blends of fuels. We've talked to a couple different laboratories that have the ability to identify both renewable diesel and biodiesel. I can't speak to their exact methodology. That is way beyond my technical capacity, but we have got confirmation that that is possible.
Okay, so there is a method, carbon-14 or radiocarbon dating. It's not very commonly available, but I guess you're considering probably doing some of that testing or sending out.
Yeah, that is one of the approaches. I know there's another approach too, that by the type of hydrocarbons, they're able to tell that it's renewable diesel from fossil diesel. I cannot explain that to you, but we've confirmed this with a couple different labs that it's possible. Yeah,
to my knowledge, really is a radiocarbon testing. If you really want, I don't know of a traditional test method that would enable to differentiate really the renewable versus the hydrocarbon. So, okay, all right. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I would invite you and anybody else who has insight and knowledge about lab testing methods for these new fuels to please provide that when you fill out that input form, which I have just put the link to in the chat again. Other questions? Please feel free to enter them in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand. Jim, thank you so much. Jim with WISPA.
Yeah, hi Marty, and yeah, and thanks again, mirroring Mark's comments. Appreciate the presentation today. Just a question on the administration side. So for this book and claim accounting methodology, it's my recollection that the rules clearly put the point of regulation at the retail site. Are you going to make edits to are you need to make edits to the rule to move that point of regulation to the supplier and or importer? And is that something that's on your radar, and how will that work?
Yes, so that's exactly for that compliance pathway. Should folks choose that route, the responsibility would be on the fuel importer.
Okay.
So we would amend the rules in that way to show that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Just wanted to make sure that was on your radar, that you'd have to amend that portion of the rule.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Jim. Others with questions? Mark, I see your hand again. I want to wait 30 seconds. Anybody who hasn't yet spoken? Mark, go ahead. Take it away.
Yeah, I'm taking advantage since it seems that we don't have that many questions. But one of the question on one of the slide I thought was interesting also is the percentage of fuel that is sold in the city of Portland. And I think if I heard it right, you're considering possibly having some kind of default value for that percentage. I think it was in one of the slides where you show like 20%, just as an example. So is that something that would be an option, or that you're considering as a default value for the fuel delivered, the percentage of fuel delivered in Portland versus the rest of the state?
Yeah.
Possibly today we don't necessarily know at a terminal where the fuel is actually dispensed or.
Yeah, exactly. So we did talk to a number of suppliers that raised that concern, is that, they don't know where that fuel necessarily will end up. So we will come up with a deemed value that is based on population. And that will be kind of the default unless someone has more, accurate numbers for what is actually delivered to the city. So folks reporting will have the opportunity to choose which approach.
Yeah, population is an interesting concept. I mean, it would work probably better with gasoline. I'm not sure that diesel demand is directly proportional to the population, depend on the, where the truck stop are located. And
yeah, it's not. But
it might be more accurate to have maybe, I don't know if you have like some kind of tax revenue from the city and looking at tax record, volume record. So you could see maybe the state has total sales. I'm sure the state has that information on total sales volumes. And then maybe the city has probably maybe some tax revenue associated with it. And that may be more representative of the percentage, maybe establish a percentage based on some kind of taxation, maybe information.
Yeah, it's an interesting suggestion. And I recommend putting that in your survey form if you'd like us to pursue that. We're definitely trying to come up with a deemed value that'll be simple and straightforward. So, but we can explore that option.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that suggestion, Mark. And I would remind anybody else who has insight or an opinion about how that percentage of diesel sales occurring in Portland might be estimated to please provide input on that through that link we put in the chat. Andrea.
Just pointing out the question in the chat from Curtis from Chevron REG, Kyle. Question about, for the book and claim quarterly reporting option for CI, will the deadlines mirror the Clean Fuels program? For example, Q1 reporting deadline will be June 30.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Great question. The floor is back open again. Ian Strong. And Ian, could you just state your affiliation as well?
Yes, my name is Ian Strong, work with Star Oil here in Portland. And Kyle, thank you for your time. Thank you for making this happen. I appreciate it. I'm sure we all do. And just wanted to bring a quick question with you. Something I get from a lot of vendors we work with and a lot of companies here in the area is concerned with supply. With California, already being pretty up to date with renewable diesel. and other states, across the whole country coming online with renewable diesel. How do you see, like, I don't know if you can fully answer the question, but how do you see, the supply affecting, the price and the availability of it here for Oregon?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's not really the subject of the rules. The rules are really kind of the process for implementing. We'll have a technical advisory committee that is charged specifically with monitoring supply and price and making recommendations to the bureau director on those changing market conditions and whether or not we need to adapt our strategy. So I'd welcome Pam Neild. She's leading the process with the TAC. If Pam would like to jump in and say anything about that, but that isn't a subject that's covered in our rules.
Okay, totally. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll just point out, I'm sending my contact information now to the chat, so feel free to contact me directly with any questions that come up. Essentially, the TAC application process closed on the 4th of June, and we're reviewing those seats right now, but we'll have more information up on the website quite shortly about that. And actually, I'm going to put the RFS listserv into the chat as well. And that's a great way to keep track of what's going on with both the rulemaking and the seating the TAC.
Yeah.
Per the ordinance, we will have the TAC seated by July 31st, 2023. That's the end date.
Yeah, and we also have the emails for everyone who registered for this meeting. So we'll be able to send some follow-up information to you directly, including where I post the PowerPoint.
Thanks, everybody. Some great questions so far. We still have a generous amount of time for your questions. So I would invite anybody who has something they're curious about, go ahead and raise your hand or post your question in the chat. Excellent. Ender Reed, please ask your question. And would you please just state your affiliation as well?
Of course, Ender Reed with Neste, and apologies, there's background noise. I'm traveling right now. Quick question, where are y'all looking for most input? Is there a problem, I don't want to say problem area, but a complicated area that y'all would like additional data specifically to help assist with drafting the rules? And thank y'all very much for putting this on. It's very helpful.
That's an interesting question. I feel like we have what we need to move forward with the rules, unless something new emerges. If you've heard something here today that you have information regarding that you'd like to share, we certainly welcome that. Our contractor Marty has done a lot of work with interviewing many stakeholders, so we feel like we've gotten quite a bit of input into this process already. But certainly welcome additional data if you have something to share. I think that covers it. I don't know. I guess the biggest challenge is just enforcement of the CI standard. As we all know, that's going to be the complex piece. So, if you were going to focus on one component, that's probably that's where the most discussion will occur.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ender. Appreciate that question. Jim, I do see your hand. I know you've already had the chance to ask a question, so let's just let me just give 30 seconds and see. Sometimes we must sit in a bit of awkward silence until questions are asked. Okay, not seeing any other questions at this time. Jim, go ahead and take the floor again.
Yeah, just a quick process question, Marty and Kyle. So if we provided input to you, Marty, I'm assuming you don't necessarily want that loaded into the, you just want new things that come up, right? Okay.
I would say you're welcome to put any input into the form that you would like. That, that is your place to contribute what you think is important. Kyle, if you disagree with me, go ahead and.
No, I mean, in general, I would say, I hope that what you passed on to Marty in the interview has been transmitted to us. If you don't see that reflected in what I presented today, then please feel free to point that out. That would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that if you spent time with Marty, we're not asking you to duplicate that work. We appreciate your time, and only if you feel the need to repeat it or there's something new. But if you've already stated it, it has gone to us. So don't need to do extra.
All right.
Marty's very thorough.
All right.
Okay, we have room for plenty of additional questions. Great, I see a hand. Mark, I'm going to ask you just to wait. Let's wait 30 seconds. Or is it hard to ask a question when there's already a hand up? Perhaps that's a bit intimidating. Mark, why don't you go ahead, and I would just ask anybody who's got a question in mind, please don't be hesitant, don't be shy. We really want to hear from you. And if you have any concern about speaking up, please put your question in the chat.
Yeah, thanks again. On the paperwork side of the product transfer document, have you tried to look at what you have to do or what you already have available today from the documentation that exists already, and would the documentation the way it's done today be sufficient for what you need, or do you envision essentially additional language in the documentation that is not reflected today?
It's a great question. My understanding, and we have looked at some of these documents, is generally that they have the information we need. Now, if you're using the absolute CI approach and you're using that really straightforward product transfer document pathway that has no reporting requirements, you will need to add the FPC, the fuel pathway code from Organ DEQ to the product transfer document. So that is a change. But for probably most that are going to be averaging CI values and taking the more complex route, the information we need to track back to that fuel importer should be on those product transfer documents.
Okay.
Marty, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's my understanding.
All right, thank you.
We were able to review a sample of product transfer documents. And so I think that would be an area where it would be really helpful to have your input. You all, many of you work in this industry, you create those documents, you receive those documents. If there's something we're missing here, please let us know. We are also, aware from the conversations with all of you that these documents are largely created by pieces of software that may be, in some cases, relatively inflexible. And, so if there's constraints on what you're able to put on your product transfer documents, or this, the number of characters in a string that you can put on that you think is going to be an impediment, please provide input on that. A lot of, what is important here, I'll just correct me, city staff, if I'm wrong, but is getting a better understanding of the conditions that you're dealing with. And the only way we learn that from you all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should add something to my comment earlier on that. So I was speaking to the CI standard, but for the blending requirement, we will need to review product transfer documents at retail. And as all of you know, there are not federal regulations on labeling renewable diesel at the pump. So that is one place where we actually would need to see on that product transfer document that, say, for May 2024, the fuel purchased was 15% renewable diesel, at least 15%. And then 50% in 2026, 99%. And so that is one little data point that I'm not clear that is on the product transfer document. Hopefully, just through the naming convention of the fuel type, we can assess that. But that is a piece that would love to have some more information about. So if anyone has some insight into that, please let us know.
Thanks, Kyle. Other questions? You know, the city staff are happy to stay on this meeting until noon, which is the scheduled time. But I would say, you know, if we have exhausted all of the questions, we will continue to wait a few more minutes. But if we get to the point where we have exhausted all the questions, we can probably give you all a little bit of time back in your day. I don't know if we're there yet. I'd like to wait a bit longer. Okay. Fantastic. Mark, we haven't heard from you yet, please.
Yeah, I'm just trying to fill the void.
And we appreciate that.
We on this regulation, and especially now it's getting into the detail of reporting, enforcement, and compliance. And I see that you have a couple of folks here from DEQ, Korean Winds, and Wind, and maybe I saw Bill Peters earlier. Have you had, what kind of discussion have you had with DEQ, or how can DEQ help making sure that either they're going to be sharing data from the OFRS, the fuels reporting system, and you know what kind of synergy have you found with DEQ in terms of this regulation being limiting additional reporting and demonstrating compliance and making sure that you're getting what you need at the city level?
Yeah, we've definitely met with the folks at DEQ about this. Our goal is to try to true up the requirements as much as possible. And I think there probably is some potential for data sharing as well. So, you know, I feel pretty good about our relationship with our friends at DEQ, and I think we'll be able to land on an approach here that's going to work best for everyone who's already regulated under that program. We really want to get as much consistency between the two requirements as possible, but there are unique bits of information that will need to be reported separately to the city. So there, we weren't really able to find a way around that, but we'll try to leverage as much as we can from the state program for consistency.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I want to suggest, and city staff, go ahead and speak up. I want to suggest that we keep this room open for another 5 minutes until 11:50. And then if we don't have any more questions at that point, I think we can give everybody 10 minutes to breathe before their noon appointments. I see Andrea nodding. So if you have a question, this is the time. Please make sure you all have taken the link that we've put in the chat to the input form. I think the city staff has made it abundantly clear that they really want to hear from you. They want your insight. They want to know what you know and what you recommend to them. So please make sure you grab that. And please also remember that that needs to be returned to them by next Monday at 5 p.m. That is a hard deadline.
I'll also note there's 2 questions on that survey, and one of them is whether you have any additional questions for us. So if there's folks who have questions that they didn't ask today, there will be the opportunity to do that through the survey, and then we'll follow up with you. Looks like we do have one more question, Marty.
Susan with Phillips 66, please.
Hi, Marty. I just had a question regarding the actual reporting itself. How will that be? Will it be through an online system? Will it be a Excel spreadsheet, just an email? What would the reporting look like?
So we haven't developed the reporting form yet, so I can't answer that question in much detail, although the goal will be to have it be an online web form like we currently have. So currently for the RFS, many of you are reporting quarterly for the current policy that's on the books. And you go to our website and there's a web form that you fill out once a quarter. So we intend to kind of maintain that approach to this, but the form itself will get developed over the coming months.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Susan. And another great area for you to provide your input on when you're filling out that online survey form. If you have a strong preference about how it would be easiest for you, please go ahead and let the city know what that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will note that currently the reporting form allows for attachments of spreadsheets and documentation. So, if an Excel spreadsheet is a better approach for you, that's something we can certainly work with. And some of the people reporting today use that approach.
Andrea, go ahead. I saw there was a question in the chat. Do you want to?
Yep, I'm just going to read this one out loud. Are there future planned meetings similar to this as the RFS progresses? Looking to hear feedback to the questions submitted through the form. So what I would say to that is the feedback to the questions submitted through the form are going to show up in our public comment draft. So that's how you will know that we have heard your feedback, and there will be, as Kyle outlined at the beginning, that timeline, about a month, which folks can comment on the public comment draft. At the end of July, we're going to have a technical advisory committee stood up, and then meetings are going to be progressing in that venue later in the year and in subsequent years. We don't expect to have another public meeting for the rulemaking process. Kyle, did I get that? Would you agree with that?
Yes,
statement?
correct. But if you do submit a question on the survey, I've already made the commitment that I'll follow up with you with an answer. And then you'll also see that reflected in the rule draft, as Andrea said. And of course, you can email me with questions as well, or we can set up a meeting if you've got stuff more in detail that you want to dig into. I really want to be accessible to folks to help make this as transparent and easy as possible as we move forward.
Julie, thank you for that question. Okay, let's just have about one more minute. Are there any last questions that you would like to pose to city staff through this venue? And I think, as Kyle just told you, this is not your only venue. It is not the last opportunity to ask questions about this policy. Just another 30 seconds, see if anybody at the very last minute would like to ask a question. All questions welcome. Ian, let's have Ian. Ian, this will be our last question of the day. Go ahead.
Totally. So, sorry if I'm asking questions already been answered, but will at least Cal's presentation be recorded and sent out, or is it not?
Yeah, so this is being recorded, and
Perfect.
and it's actually live streaming on our YouTube channel. So it'll be there on YouTube. There'll be a link from our website. We'll send that out to the folks who registered.
Awesome.
And we'll also get the PowerPoint out to folks as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, Ian. So I would like to say thank you to everybody for participating, and just hand the floor to Kyle to close us out today.
Okay. Great, thank you, Marty. I think I've said everything that I need to say. We are, want to move pretty quickly to finalize the rules. And again, as I said, this is our first cut at the rules. So we've got time here to refine things further if necessary. But we want to move forward with final rules pretty quick so that there's some certainty in the market about what to expect over the coming months. And as I noted earlier, the rules will not be effective until May of 2024. So just a little heads up about that. And again, you have my contact info. We'll be getting information posted online, and you'll hear from us shortly as we announce our public comment draft, probably in about a week or so. Will really depend on what comes through on the survey. So thank you everyone for joining us. I hope this has been helpful for folks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for taking all my questions.
Of course, happy to do it. They were all good questions. All right.
Well
Okay.
done, team.
Stop the recording.